Hi, I'm Brian Dietmeyer. Welcome to another episode of Close Mode, the Enterprise Sales Show. And today, I'm really lucky to be talking to my pal, Walt Zola, who is the Chief Customer Officer at Newman's Own. Hey, Walt, welcome to the show.
Brian, good to see you, and thanks for inviting me.
Can I give a shout out to Newman's Own? Is it Stone-Fired Margarita Pizza? I have to.
Stone-fired margarita pizza. I'm assuming your favorite, my favorite.
Yes. I strongly suggest to anyone who's looking for pizza. It's quite good. So that aside, that free plug aside, today we're talking about leadership and Walt in complete sincerity. I mean, looking back through your resume, you've been a VP of Sales, SVP of Sales, Chief Customer Officer, and some big organizations. And it's interesting in our pre-interview, we talk about enterprise selling stuff, and you and I kept wandering back to leadership naturally, and we said, "Hey, let's talk about it." And you were honest about mistakes you made and things you've learned in leadership positions over the years. So that's what we're gonna spend some time on today. So
Great.
yeah, my first question is, so let's before we talk about the strong chops you have in leadership today, and I think you have, and I know firsthand. What from early positions, what mistakes do you think are common for like new leaders? Because I think that's who this show is going to benefit most, both in terms of like being a leader and communicating up, and being a leader and managing and leading your team. What mistakes did you make that you think others might avoid?
A lot of people look at titles within organizations. Somebody gets promoted, or they themselves get promoted to a certain position. And I think a lot of people have this misconception that because there's a title, that person's a leader. Now, they are in a leadership position,
Yes.
but a title doesn't make somebody a leader.
Interesting.
Listen, there's no perfect leaders out there. Just like there's no perfect parents, there's no perfect golfers out there. You've got to be a student of leadership, and you've got to hone your craft, and you learn a lot along the way. I once had somebody tell me that practice doesn't make perfect, practice makes permanent.
Right.
And I'm a strong believer in that.
Okay.
You can practice all you want. You're not going to be necessarily perfect all the time, but it's just being permanent. So I think the first mistake I think people make is because they get a title or they get promoted.
Interesting.
Well-deserved, that they quickly think that they're a leader. But leadership is, it's not necessarily given through a title. And I think that's probably the one fallacy that people have when they look at titles or if they get promoted out there. I think the other thing, a couple of errors that people make is not effectively communicating to their teams or to somebody higher up in the organization, laying out clear expectations. I once heard this phrase that 90% of performance issues are caused by a lack of clear expectations.
Yeah.
That most people want to do a good job when they come to work.
Yeah.
And when the leader sits down with them or their manager and says, gee, you worked hard, but you didn't quite do it the right way, a lot of times you find out is, gee, I didn't really know that's what the expectation was.
Right.
And gee, if you only just told me and you articulated that, I would have done it. So that's on the role of the leader in terms of clear expectations. I think the other error that sometimes new leaders make is this vulnerability, being vulnerable and asking questions. There's this misperception that, gee, because this person's a leader in the organization, they have all the answers. And that's not necessarily true.
Yeah.
Asking questions and listening. And it's okay to just say, I just don't know. Can you help me understand that? Or if you don't know, is there somebody we can go to and have a conversation to learn more about? So those are some of the basic things I think new leaders sometimes miss when they get a title or they're put into a position that might be viewed as a leadership position.
Yeah, so some of those sound familiar from my kind of cringing a little from some of my early leader positions. But so what occurs to me based on your answer is, we're going to talk for a moment about your view now on leadership, but how do you evolve? Like, is this a born not made thing? Like we used to say about salespeople, like, do you have to have time in the role and get your clock cleaned a bunch? Can we learn some of this? How do we avoid those mistakes?
Probably to answer your question is yes. So it's a little bit. There are
Yeah.
some people I think it might come a little bit more natural to
Yeah.
them. Some it may not.
Yeah.
Having adept communication skills and being able to, a lot of times people say this person's a great leader because they're so charismatic.
Yeah.
That to me, it's a trait. It's not necessarily a leadership skill. Now,
Yeah.
does it come in handy having a charismatic personality? Absolutely.
Yeah.
But are they great leaders because of that? No, they're not. And I've seen people in organizations lead without having titles. They lead and they might be more junior in the organization, but they understand in terms of some of the principles of leading, and they're not given a title, but you can see that they lead, and they might not be charismatic. They might be the most introverted individual out there, but that doesn't mean you can't lead.
Yeah. I think,
So I think there's this misconception sometimes that it's like, hey, this boisterous person that really communicates well, that they're great leaders. Yeah, it's a trait. It helps, but it's not the definition of leadership.
yeah, it's what comes to mind when you're saying that about those natural leaders. There are some people who are like, I'm a big fan of EQ, and it's like some people have a natural high EQ, and an easier way for me to understand EQ is read the room, right? Some people just cannot read the room.
100%.
So can you, I'll tell you, when I told you I was cringing, my first VP job, I reported to an SVP whose name was Roger Dow, and really, really nice guy. And but this is how our relationship started. This is the cringy part. I was kind of trash talking Roger behind his back. I didn't think he was a very good technical leader. And he came to me once and he handed me a book called Lincoln on Leadership. And of course, it got back to him, right? Your VP, your direct report is trash talking you. And he was so cool about it. He came to me and he said, and he put a sticky on the one page where the Lincoln on Leadership book said, you can't be a good leader until you're a good follower. And that, like, all of that was coming to mind when you were going through that cringy discussion where I was like, but that was great leadership, right? That was so cool because he could have beat me up. He could have threatened me, and he helped me grow. And this was 25, 30 years ago. And I remember the moment. I remember the quote, you can't be a good leader until you're a good follower.
Yeah, that is a great example. And you think about somebody with that level of EQ.
Yes.
That they hear about, one of their direct reports kind of trashing them a little bit. And to be able to elevate above that and looking at it as a, leadership or coaching moment, that's rarefied air.
Yeah.
I mean, to get to that level, and it's something that, you have to constantly work on and be aware of.
Yeah, for sure. And we're still friends today. And I did everything I could to screw it up a long time ago, and he fixed it. So a couple of things I want to talk about as it relates to what you've learned about leadership and where you think your kind of chops are now. I want to talk a little bit about, you mentioned something to me, which I think about leadership, about the team that reports to you. And you started with reporting up, like to the board level. And so, give me your insight about what's your view on effective leadership communicating up to that executive level? What guides you?
It's interesting. And again, I'm constantly practicing and trying to be aware and learn various leadership skills. But as I think about like CEOs, board members, I think in terms of kind of where they're at, their perception of kind of the organization. Boards aren't in the day-to-day minutia of the business. They come in 4 or 5 times a year and you meet with them. And so I think there are some critical skills that you have to hone or adapt to. And one is just adept communication. And by that, I mean, how do you be persuasive? How do you lay out your strategy, your vision, your goals in a meaningful but succinct manner?
Right.
And when I say succinct, that doesn't mean just, kind of the short edition, but you don't have to go and tell them the story, play by play, everything that you do every single day. You're trying to basically engage them, tell them the story in terms of kind of where you're at or where there's a particular project or whatever it may be, where you're at, because if you can engage them, whether you are looking for feedback from them, you're looking for their expertise, you're looking for maybe a connection, you're looking for more resources, they want to help, but the way they do is quickly get them up to speed in terms of where you're at, what you're doing, without kind of this long drawn out, here's all the, 35 pages of all the details. We're human beings. We
Well,
don't have capacity to do that.
yeah, you got me with the storytelling. Now, you also said it's a short story, but a story. These are humans, and man, the story format is really cool. Like that's a great idea.
That that is, I actually went through some training about story selling, and it is interesting when you think about a movie. There's always the introduction. They kind of set the stage. You learn the characters. There's some kind of conflict.
Yep.
And then eventually there's conflict resolution, and then, happily ever after. If there was no conflict somewhere in there,
right,
it'd be the most boring movie you'd ever go to.
Yep.
And you always think about that. It's like people want to be told that story. I think the other thing, you've got to listen, and you've got to build trust over time with them. Listen to what they're saying, not necessarily how they're saying it all the time. And then I think what you had mentioned earlier, which I think is probably the most critical, is just the emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
That EQ portion, and you've got to be able to control your emotions. It doesn't mean suppress, but just be able to control.
Yeah.
And then also, I think it is a great talent that if somebody can control the emotion of their room,
yes,
to be aware of the emotion. If it is getting too hot, how do you dial it down? If it needs to get dialed up a little bit. So I've seen some great leaders being able to kind of dial up the emotion of the entire room or bring it back down.
Right.
That is an art. And it's very effective.
Yeah, that sounds like the 200 level course, right? Because that I agree with you in that moving the room in that way. You said something to me a couple of weeks ago when we were chatting about communicating up. That's like on a really tactical thing that you do that I thought was interesting, and it was about delivering bad news. Give me that. That was really helpful for me now having a board and having investors and that kind of thing. So yeah, wax a little about delivering bad news.
Yeah. So it is funny. It's kind of one of those compliments I got one time from a manager, and said, "Boy, here's one thing you really do well as a leader." I'm like, "What is that?" He's like, "You deliver bad news so quickly." And I kind of thought, I'm like, well, I'm not sure if that's something I want to be really good at all the time.
Yeah.
Because if I'm doing it frequently and I have a lot of practice, I'm not sure that's a good thing. But I understood what he was saying. And the reason being is, listen, we get good news. Everybody is like, hey, this is fantastic news. Look at all this wonderful news. I want to communicate it to the world out there. Well, it's human nature. They don't want to communicate the bad news, and they don't want to communicate it quickly. From my perspective, it is difficult. But at the end of the day, if it's a business or a service, if I'm running that organization, I would want to know that as quickly as possible. Basically, do we have to shift our strategy? Do we have to shift our tactics? Do we have to reposition ourselves?
Yeah.
Or is there a way that we can reverse with different resources, whether it's financial, whether it's people, whatever it may be?
Yeah.
Reverse that. So, I've always been, again, a lot of practice, but it is one of those areas where I'm like, you know what? People are going to find out. Let's just communicate right away, just so everyone understands kind of what the lay of the land is.
Yeah, it's funny. My CTO talks about fail fast, fix fast all the time, and it kind of the other thing you said a moment ago too about communicating up is like building trust with that group. Yeah, as a concept, that's an important thing. But I just connected as you were walking through that they then know. That's one of those trust building. Like, I'm going to come in. I'm not going to come in and blow smoke all day long. I'm going to come in with the bad news quickly as well. So yeah, I think that's a great lesson.
And I think sometimes individuals kind of make the bad news out bigger than what it might be.
Right.
It's kind of. I used to work with somebody who's called MSU, making stuff up in your own head. If you're sitting on the board, if you're CEO, you don't want to hear bad news, but you want to learn about it quickly, just so you understand kind of the lay of the land and what needs to adjust. One thing I do with my team is we celebrate not failures but learnings.
Yep.
And it's something that the team embraces, that if somebody fails out there, okay, we're not jumping up and down and cheering, but the question is why do you think you failed? What'd you learn?
Yeah.
And that learning, believe it or not, we just try to celebrate it, because other people who may not have gone down the road in terms of where somebody else went, they're thanking them, going, you know what? gee, I'm sorry that it failed, but I'm kind of glad that you told me why it failed,
Yeah.
because I was thinking the same way. I was going to go down this road, and now that it didn't work, I'm going to go down a different road. So there is some positivity when you deliver if there's a failure, but it's like, boy, whatever you can learn
Yeah.
and spread that and share that, it becomes actually kind of a winning culture mentality. And
Yep. Well, we morphed into the leadership of the people who report to you. So what are kind of I think you just gave one. Any other guiding principles now about communicating to the team and leading the team? What guides you there?
yeah, it's a good question. And what's interesting, obviously, everyone's different. I'm a believer you can't lead everybody the same way. You can't manage everybody the same way. They're all at different points in their career, different experiences, different backgrounds. Very, diversity. It's a great thing. I also think too, from a leadership standpoint, you don't want to just delegate.
Yeah.
What you're trying to do is how do you enable them?
Yeah.
Enable them to go out and complete whatever project or work that they're going to do as they see fit. So I can easily, as earlier on, I was saying that because you have a title doesn't mean that you're a leader. If you have a title, you can still get things done in an organization. Why? Because you have people in different parts of the organization that might be more junior that you can say, go do this.
Yeah.
Well, they're going to do it. So you can complete tasks, but in terms of you don't want to delegate and tell them so much as you want to try to enable them.
Yeah.
So you want to give them the expectations, the tools, the training to be able to go out and do whatever they need to do as they see fit.
So, Walt, it's interesting as you walk through that. Something came to mind. I had in my previous company, I had a VP of sales that the sales team loved and the channels loved, and I thought that was pretty cool. And I realized that, he was their hero, right? Literally, that's how it was hero worship with this guy. And it took me a while to realize that was the wrong thing because they were scared. They wanted him in every meeting. And I, for a while, I thought that was pretty cool. And then I realized it's no, it's not your job, especially in sales, to be the hero. It's to make other people a hero. And when you talked about enabling them, that was a really street level, like, yeah, I remember seeing that, having to go to him and say, you need to transfer those skills.
Yeah, that's an interesting observation. And as I think about leadership, I heard this saying one time. I thought it was pretty profound. It said, "Leaders never take as much of the credit, but they take a lot of the blame."
Yeah.
And as I think about that, is if the team or an individual is successful, the best thing you could do is give them the credit and let them do the victory lap. If something does go wrong, it's okay from a leadership standpoint to take the heat off of them. They could have conversations afterwards, one-on-one with individuals if there's a certain issue. But for the most part, is like, how do you are going to take more of the blame.
Yeah.
And senior management above you might view you as like, oh, at the end of the day, you're kind of that captain of that ship. So yeah, that's great that they were successful because they're really good rowers. And the reason the boat sank was because of the captain.
Yes.
So it is okay to be kind of taking that approach. You never, as a leader, I agree with you. You never want to be viewed as the hero per se because you don't want to be in the spotlight.
Yep. We want to create
too much from a leadership perspective.
Create heroes. I worked for Bill Marat, and he used to say that the same things that lead to your success will lead to your demise. And a lot of leaders came up because they are rock star individual performers, and it's like, guess what? Those chops are not going to benefit you in this next role.
No, and that's a great point that you brought up. Is because people are great individual performers or contributors doesn't make them great managers or leaders. I mean, we've all heard that, and it is some of the most average selling people have become some of the greatest leaders out there.
Yeah,
I've seen.
Yeah. It's like my job now is to create rock stars. Not you are a rock star, and then you got promoted, and now guess what? And that to me, if you're a new leader, another huge mistake that I made, which is you'll become a rock star if you make your people rock stars, which is a shift a seismic shift in your brain about how you go there. Something else you mentioned to me a couple of weeks ago was a soft skill, but I felt like was really important, especially with today's younger folks, with millennials. You talked about safety, which I thought was really interesting. That you build like a safe environment for your folks, and some of that you just talked about how you did that. But yeah, can you? What's your perspective on that?
Um, yeah, I do. I am a believer. Listen, we all want to work in that safe environment.
Yeah,
So I kind of like, gee, I'd love to work in that safe environment where there is no fear. But yeah, I always encourage my teams that whether it's good news, bad news, whatever issue it is just tell me.
yeah,
Come talk to me and have a conversation. And it's how you react
yes,
to that.
yeah,
And it's subtle too. Whether your body language or your facial expressions, like you really have to be aware of how you react
yeah,
and not getting overly emotional. It's say if something happens and it didn't go well and we lost this distribution or lost this sale or this service or whatever it is, this client. Okay, that's okay. Let's understand why
yeah,
so we can learn from it and it's something we can share with
yeah.
others. And number two, what are the steps moving forward? Might not be to recover from that particular loss, but is there something else now we need to pivot and move forward on? Creating that safe environment, I think that enables my team that they will come to me and say, here's the challenge, here's the issue, instead of hiding it. And at the end of the day, it doesn't do anybody any good. It doesn't do them any good. Me, the organization is like,
Yeah.
that's just not good. So creating, I use the word safe, and I think whether it's safe or comfortable, whatever it may be, but partnership. And I always tell my team, I'm like, if you've got an issue or if you've got a concern, the best thing you can do for me is similar to like being a board member or CEO is you don't have to take me into the details unless it's relevant.
Right.
Give me the headlines. Tell me kind of what the issue was and what the challenges are and kind of what you did about it. What are you thinking about it? Quickly get me up to where you're at from a process standpoint so I can contribute. I may not have the solution, but based on experience or resources I might be able to get, here are the solutions or here are some ideas in terms of how to approach it.
I wonder. Here's something that just came to mind that, like, personally, I'm intrigued by. So I'm assuming along your career, you've fired people. I've only had to do it a few times, and the very first time I did it, I was convinced that I was going to do this in a way that was going to go well, and this person was going to like me when they walked out the door. And it failed miserably, and I had to do it, a few more times over my career since then. And I've never gotten there. It's like, I'm sure you've had a fight. It is for, again, for new leaders. Is there a way to actually walk away from those where you're not the bad guy?
The short answer is no.
Good.
And
Okay.
and I will, yes, I've had situations where I've had to free up futures for individuals outside of the organizations to do bigger and better
Nice.
things.
That's good.
But
That's good
the one
framing, by
thing,
the way. I love the framing. It's not lost on me. I like that. And I'm sure it doesn't work,
and
but it's nice framing.
it, it in my head, I keep telling myself that. But
Yeah.
I think it's. I told somebody one time because we had this conversation. I had a conversation one time with another leader and going through the situation. I'm like, here's what you have to consider: the day that you feel okay and comfortable with it is probably not where you want to be.
Yeah.
Um, I'm very. I go into it very empathetic
Yeah.
because I view it as treating the person with respect and dignity.
Yeah.
I'm not the one who has to now go home or go somewhere and tell somebody I no longer am employed.
Yes.
I finish my communication, then I'm off to the next task that I have at my job. So, I take it. I take it very seriously. I also separate the fact that it's a business decision, or if it's a performance issue, it's another approach. But if it's a pure business, at the end of the day, I'm thinking to myself, well, the organization, I'm accountable for whatever business goals that need to be met. Unfortunately, this position is no longer needed within this organization. So respectful and professional from a company
Yeah.
perspective, going, this is my role and responsibility to communicate this, but also empathetic in terms
Yeah.
of this information that I'm
Yes. Oh,
communicating.
yeah.
And I also
Yeah.
tell people that where you may have had a great relationship with that person, understand now you are the company
Yes.
as soon as you deliver
Yeah.
that. You were kind of that entity of this
Yeah.
corporation. So,
I'm sure it's happened, but you answered my question. That was a legit question. It's like, how do you do it and not be the bad guy? It's nearly impossible. But what you said that like, so we can't manage their emotions and their reaction, but we do have to manage our side and not be comfortable, not be mean about it. I think that's great. So you mentioned something else to me. A lot of us use profiles of our team players, right? Automated kind of profiles to get what motivates them. But you have an interesting use of technology and how you employed that data. Can you? That was insightful for me. Can you talk about that a little bit?
sure, yeah, there's, as you think about a team or an organization, what's the first thing you do is like when you're giving a performance review, here's what you do well, and here's what you're not good at, and you got to work on it real hard. Gallup did this survey, and they did a lot of insight work and studies, and they found that people. So you can tell me it's like, well, you need to do a better job controlling your emotions, blah blah blah, and all
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. And I'll work on it. I'll make some headway on it. But what they found is the amount of effort that people put into something that they might be a weakness, they really don't make any kind of transformational change.
Okay.
So they actually flipped it on its side and said, what if we took the approach of positive psychology, identify what people's strengths are, what they gravitate towards naturally, what they enjoy doing, and what if we identify these 34 different traits? And the tool is called Strengths
Okay.
Finder
Okay.
by Gallup. And there's an S after strengths, Strengths Finder. And you go in and you take this test, and it takes about 45 minutes. It's fascinating. And it basically at the end it spits out going, here's Brian's 5 strengths that he gravitates towards based on how you answer the questions.
Yeah.
So it could be you're a maximizer, or you're an organizer, or you're competitive, or you're creative. And there's 34, and they've got the definition of all the different strengths. And what I've done with teams in the past is we've gone and we've taken it, including myself, taken this test, and we all share, and I aggregate our strengths, each one of us. And it's fascinating because ideally the best teams are ones who are balanced.
Yeah.
You've got some very creative people, you've got some very analytical people, you've got some introverts, whatever it may be. What you find though is sometimes teams tip one way or the other. So maybe we've got a very analytical team. We don't have a really creative team, but we've got a very analytical
Right.
team, or vice versa. You're not going to change what their strength is, but what you will do is be able to identify, share with the team, going, we just need to be aware that we are a very analytical team and maybe not as creative. So when it comes to creativity, we either have to make an extra effort, or we may want to bring somebody in from outside of our team to help us
Yeah.
from a creativity. And that's okay too, to kind of balance the team out. And I've used that tool probably in about 4 or 5 organizations. It's pretty cool in terms of, again, it's what people naturally gravitate
Well,
towards.
the thing that I loved about it is I think about those sorts of things as strengths and areas of improvement for the individuals, and that notion of let's look at the team dynamic, the team culture, which is driven by the collective. For anyone who hasn't done it, I mean, I think it's brilliant. I'd love to do it in my own organization. Yeah, it's a cool view of rolling it up to the dynamic of the culture. Yep.
The most insightful thing you're going to get out of it, you're going to do the test, you're going to get your score back, and you're going to go, well, that's not what I want to be. I want to be something. I want to have different strengths.
Yeah.
But it's not. It's just what you naturally gravitate towards.
Yep. Well, the thing that I loved about it is I think about those sorts of things as strengths and areas of improvement for the individuals, and that notion of let's look at the team dynamic, the team culture, which is driven by the collective. For anyone who hasn't done it, I mean, I think it's brilliant. I'd love to do it in my own organization. Yeah, it's a cool view of rolling it up to the dynamic of the culture. Yep. Well, this is cool, and I mean sincerely. I would have loved to have had this conversation in my very first leadership position for real, because I learned a lot when we spoke the other day. I learned a lot today, so I totally appreciate it. And today's sponsor is Newman's Own Pizza, so we want to thank today's sponsor for this. Thanks, Walt. This is really fun. Appreciate it.